Well, some passages in the Bible are really difficult, just for a basic reason that um, so many times what one particular author, or even perhaps God, what he's trying to teach or what he's trying to convey as an important value for life, ends up being very different from the values that we hold on to today. For instance, we hold on strongly to a value of freedom and the idea of being set free or being freed. And of course, the Bible talks a whole bunch about freedom. So that's not the issue. It's not that God is not a God of freedom, and that the Bible does not affirm and value and at times just put freedom as a high value. But actually, there are times when the Bible is concerned about teaching um, and putting emphasis on different values. So, for instance, the book of Exodus has passages that deals directly with the issue of slavery, and of course, we would think right away, okay, if we're going to talk about slavery, then we need to talk about people being set free from slavery. Slavery is wrong, and the answer to slavery is abolition, abolish slavery, and that's kind of been the motto that we have here in the West with regards to slavery, and so that's an important value that we have, and so that makes passages that deal with slavery very difficult when the passage doesn't directly jump right to free your slaves. And we have the same problem in the New Testament when Paul brings up slavery, slaves being subject to their masters, or the book of Philemon, where Paul's not coming right out and saying, Philemon, you shouldn't have a slave, you should know better. But these are common things in the ancient world, whether that's the New Testament, the time of the Roman Empire, or the ancient world that we read about when we begin to look at the law of Moses and the ancient world that law was addressing, and all of the ancient problems and all the ancient scenarios that come up. And among them are issues of slavery. And so when the issue of slavery comes up in the Bible, it doesn't actually automatically jump to, these slaves should all go free. In fact, one of the really unique and interesting principles that gets brought up as an important value, or we might say God had to reveal to us, because we think of values, at least when it comes to slavery, we think of freedom, that God has to bring revelation of a different value, and that value that He brings, at least in when you get to Exodus and you see the laws that talk about slavery, actually the important value is family. So instead of, oh, you have a slave, you should let him go free, the value becomes, oh, you have a slave, you should take care of him, you should give him one of your daughters, or if your slave is a female, you should give him one of your sons, so that he can become part of your family. And that was, so those laws were directed towards the patriarch, or the man of the house in the ancient world, to actually deal justly with their slaves by giving them family, not by sending them off. So actually in the ancient world, this actually spoke right to their values. And God did not give the Israelites a law that was it was closer reflecting our laws today. He gave the Israelites laws that dealt with the things that they valued, and dealt practically with something that was going to be a reoccurring issue. Like in Exodus chapter 21, 1 through 11, it talks all about slavery and how actually this is going to be a problem. This is going to be a normal problem, and it remains a problem all the way through to the time of the first century when Paul's talking. And so a lot of these passages parallel. So this issue of slavery has continued, and God has provided laws for how to navigate the issue of slavery. And so the ultimate justice is not to send them away. In fact, for women, that would have probably destroyed their life or their reputation, because a woman without a covering in the ancient world was forced into a life of prostitution, or forced into a life where she's constantly seeking a covering, constantly seeking a male who will take her in. And with each new male that doesn't take her in, she's further and further defiled and and unwanted and a prostitute. And this is a terrible injustice. So in the ancient world, the idea that, for instance, in chapter 21 of Exodus, when the daughter is being given to a son, this is not some weird, horrible, evil, sexual kind of abusive thing. This is a justice issue, and everyone in the ancient world reading this would know, oh yes, that's justice. They made sure to give the woman a place. They made sure to give her a husband, someone who she can have children with. Because in the ancient world, this is the highest value, and that is family. For women, it meant family was having a covering and having children. And so family was the most important value to people in the ancient world. And that's what helps us to understand some of these passages related to slavery as well as related to women. Women really found their value in having a covering and being able to have children. And not only did this give them value, but this gave them security. This gave them a place in the family, and then having children meant someone would be there to care for them for the rest of their life. So this is really important stuff. So this just shows that there are very important things that we need to know in order to really understand some of these difficult passages in a way that is not going to just make the text mean whatever we want it to mean, or ignore passages we like and what ones we don't like. In fact, taking a closer look at difficult passages often leads to a pretty cool surprise where you say, wow, I had no idea that this passage could point me to this kind of revelation, this kind of new principle that I never thought of. And so actually it's a really cool, even then, for rethinking the way that we think about our own time. And of course, freedom remains an important value when we think of social injustice and so on. But having multiple values certainly helps to sort of look at the situations that we're facing today, to sort of judge them, and to sort of begin to wrap our minds around how we're to actually walk out and be the body of Christ today, and look a little bit different still from the rest of the world. And this is going to be a very useful thing to do. So I just want to introduce this idea of beginning to explore and to dive into difficult passages with us. We're going to continue to bring as much as we can as far as light on these passages as we go through. And so that's a general idea of, I think, some of the important things you need to begin to look at when you're talking about difficult passages. One of the things we forget is that the Bible is an ancient book. It's ancient literature, thousands and thousands of years old, some of it. And what we need to realize is that that's a whole other world that we don't know. We're essentially going cross-culture, and we're crossing time and back into the past, and there's just so much we need to know. And luckily today there's actually quite a bit that we can study and that we can begin to look at to help us to understand how that world worked, and what they valued and what was important. And that certainly helps us to interpret passages of the Bible without being offended, because they don't address our values. They're not speaking to the values that we already have. And so many times we're going to say, oh, I don't like that, or I don't understand that, or we might even be led to think, oh, God is a God of injustice. God doesn't care about women. God doesn't care about slaves. But then, like in these passages, once you take a closer look, what you see is, oh, actually it's just, there's just another principle at work here when it comes to fixing situations of slavery. And actually what we find out is God totally hates slavery. He hates the evils of slavery, and he actually has an answer. His answer is not just freedom, sending off the slaves, but actually changing the way that you view them. And certainly this is true in the New Testament as well, is that Paul is challenging the leaders of the church to don't just get rid of your slaves, change the way that you view them. Keep them around. They can serve you, they can serve the body of Christ, but you don't have to see them as slaves anymore. You don't have to treat them like that anymore. And they have value and they're important. And so this is actually a difficult passage that you will run into throughout the whole Bible. And there's actually a number of key things that I think you can keep in mind. And so I hope that some of these things have helped you. Um,